paper is pretty sturdy, so you can do a lot to it. But if you really want to get the paper wet and work on it a lot, you may want to get like a mixed media or a watercolor paper to work with. You'll find those have more cotton in them, so they can expand and they won't wrinkle and disintegrate like the paper pulp paper. So whenever we're working with ink or anything like paint on paper, it's hard. If you want anything to be white like the paper, you have to just leave that area alone, right? And so when you're new, it may be a challenge to do that. So they make several things that we call resist to keep your paper nice and white. One of the things you can use is rubber cement. And rubber cement, it's not really healthy to breathe, but as long as you put the cap back on pretty quickly, you can. You can put other brushes in it, but the brush that comes with it, it's kind of coarse. And but the rubber cement is also clear, so wherever you put it down, you really can't see it always, but it will seal the paper, and once it's dry, when you put the ink over it, the ink won't go in those areas, and then when everything's dry, you can rub it off and it'll leave your paper nice and clean. But not always perfectly, because it's not as easy to use. But something that works really well is called masking fluid, or sometimes you'll see it called Frisket. It's called Frisket on that paper that I gave you. And this is a liquid latex rubber that has a dye in it that doesn't stain paper. I don't know what magic dye it is, but I'm shaking it because it's like a yellow dye and it makes it a little off-white. And a lot of watercolor, anything I show you, you can do with watercolor and ink, okay? The only thing that won't work is if you get like acrylic ink, sometimes they won't do the same technique. So this smells like, it smells like a rubber band. It has like a really stinky, I don't know how to describe it, but do you see this brush? This was a brush and now it's like rubber. And so that's what happens to it, and it has this off-white color. So if you do a drawing in like pencil, you can take like a brush you don't want to ever use again for anything else, and you could put this stuff on, and you don't want it to be too thick or it's going to take a long time to dry, but do you see how you can see it where you can't really see the rubber cement? You can also, like, it's so precise, if I just splatter like little dots of it, those will dry and it will keep those nice and clean. And I've done paintings before with ink and watercolor where I'd splattered and made like several layers of stars like in the sky, and when it all dried and I rubbed them off, like it looked like a photograph. Like it's really precise, so it's kind of fun. And I have OCD, so I love picking at things, and this is really fun. It's like peeling rubber bands off your paper, so it's kind of fun. But you don't want to use a brush because it's ruined once you use it. But they do make some little rubber things you can use with this, but it's really cheap. I actually got this at Walmart. They had it on the arts and crafts aisle, but you can get it at Michael's and Hobby Lobby and places like that too. So I did these first just because they have to dry before you put the ink on them. Another thing you can use is wax. So crayons work really nice. So you could take, you could use color crayons as well, but if you use like a black crayon and then black ink, you're not gonna see it. But you could take and put text or press down hard with like a white crayon or even a color crayon, and then when you put the ink over it, the crayon's gonna keep the ink from absorbing into the paper. And so it looks really cool, and but you can't get the wax off the paper ever, so it kind of stays there. And then another thing you can use is candles. Like these are little clear tea candles, and you can use those and just lightly rub them on the paper, and you can kind of create gradation sometimes depending on how hard you press down, but it will also resist the ink. But again, you can't really get the wax off the paper once it's done. So all of those are different ways you can keep areas of your paper white when you're using watercolor or India ink. Okay. Now to work with the ink more traditionally, we create washes, and to me this is a very simple concept, but sometimes students don't quite get it. So basically it's different amounts of water and ink. So the more water and the less ink, the lighter value that it will be. So like there's a painting I did with like someone with like eyes in the back of their head, and so the eye part that I did with doing this technique, I made different washes and painted it just like a value study. And so if you want to do something like that, this is how you would do that. So in one of these little wells, I'm gonna just put 1 drop of ink. Okay, and then I'm gonna skip 1. And these little wells, you can get these at the craft store too, or Walmart, or you can even use like an old ice tray if you have like an ice tray in your freezer. And if you have plastic egg cartons, those work as well. But sometimes the styrofoam ones will like disintegrate. They're made to be more biodegradable now. But you can find these or use little plastic cups or whatever you want. So I just put 1 little drop in 1 well, and then I'm gonna put like 2 or 3 in this one. And I'm skipping because I don't want that many different values. Now, if you move around a lot, you may put a piece of paper under this and label it like lightest or 1, 2, 3, so you know which ones are darker and which ones are not. And this one, I think that's about 5 or 6. So I'm gradually adding more ink to each one, and I am counting the dots because there does need to be some precision to it. Okay, and then in the middle, I usually just put some pure black ink if I want that. Now, what I'm gonna do to create the different values is I'm gonna take, this is just a little eardropper that I filled with water. So I'm gonna fill them all to the same point with water. And so the one with the less ink, it's gonna have more water and less ink. So I'm just gonna fill them all up to the same level. And a lot of times I see students using palettes like this for acrylic and oil, and these are not, I don't know what's happening, this is a leak. But these are not for oils and acrylics, so these are made for liquid media. So you would use these for like watercolor and ink only, because you can't really mix the different values of acrylic and oil in these little holes. So now I'm going from the lightest value to the darkest value, just kind of stirring it with this stick. And then now when I'm going to just put it on the paper up here to show you the range of values. So it should make like a lighter value. Now on the drawing paper, you'll see like it kind of puddles a little bit, but on the watercolor paper, it just like soaks in right away. So you may get some inconsistency just because the drawing paper is not as absorbent, but it'll still work. Now I'm not touching these next to each other because they'll bleed into each other. So if you're gonna do a values study in ink, you'll want to do like all one, let it dry, then the other, otherwise they'll bleed into each other. But do you see how they're gradually getting darker? So you may have a drawing class in the future, maybe a figure drawing class where your teacher tells you bring ink one day, and you may have to make these values and then have a model, and you'll have to draw the model using ink. So you may have to use it more traditionally in some classes. So you can see that's not even the pure black ink, that's the last one that I made, but I have these different values. So you could just use those, and then the dark one, you can see it's like really, really black. But it dries really flat and it absorbs in the paper, so it's a little different than like using acrylic paint or anything like that. So these should be dry now where I put these resists, and you can see this was the rubber cement. And you can see it's resisting the ink, but once it dries completely, then you could rub off the rubber cement. And then this is that frisket or the masking fluid. And you can see it resisted it a lot. And again, you want to wait till the ink dries, and then you can pick off that, and your paper will be nice and clean. And then I think I'll put the crayon somewhere around here, and you can see it resisting. And once it's dry, you can take a damp paper towel and kind of buff it, and it will come out more. And then this area, I had the candle on, and you can see how it is resisting as well. So it's kind of, it looks like a bird.
That's really cool.
All right, so those are the resists. That's how you create the values. Now for some of the more fun stuff, I'll show you. You can wet the paper, and I forgot to get a cup with water. Grab that real fast. And you guys can use any of these cups and stuff over by the sink. So one technique you can do is called wet on wet, and that's what that lady was doing in that video. It sounds kind of dirty, but it's just wetting the paper and then putting the ink on it. But it's really fun and kind of exciting, especially to like children. They get more excited about these kind of things. But you can take a brush or whatever, and when you put the ink on the wet, thanks Annette, I appreciate you.
Yeah, that's so cool.
My other class was just like, what? But to me, it's kind of cool. You can, even if you drop like splatters on it, they'll bleed out, and you can use it with watercolors too. But it's kind of fun. So you may have, like if you're doing a painting of the sky, and there's all these clouds that kind of bleed, you may wet the paper and just kind of let it be more expressive instead of trying to paint them, perfectly. Like you could let it be more kind of expressive like that. Let's say that you're painting with the ink and you want it to kind of bleed out, but just in one area. You could take like a little small spritzer and just spritz it like in certain areas to kind of control like where you want it to bleed if you want to. And then you can also draw with different tools. So this is just a bamboo skewer, and I have some more here that you guys could take one if you wanted. This is what you use to cook with, so you can get them for really cheap. But these work really great. They're pretty absorbent, and so like you can see, like you can make a lot of marks before it runs out of ink. So even if you don't have like a fancy quill, you could just dip it into the ink and do like hatching or lines. And I don't know, there's something about the liquid ink that looks really nice, and it won't smudge. Like once it's dry, like you can put your hand over it and it won't smudge. And you don't always have to use the darker inks. So if you had lighter value inks, you could still do the same thing. So this is where, like I told y'all, like I used to have the students find a stick in the woods to draw with, so it would make really unique marks like this. So you can use that. You can find these little quills and nibs at the craft stores, and I think this is one I got at Walmart, and it has the different calligraphy tips if you want. You want to make sure you wash these though, because if the ink dries in it, it won't flow the same way. But these are kind of fun, and I mean they make similar marks, but sometimes you can get some that are even finer than the bamboo sticker. I can't. It's just kebab thing. I don't know why I can't think of it.
Kebab thing.
Yeah. So anyway, you can see like how super fine this one is, and I have some that are like at angles, and you can do like the calligraphy, the fancy letter writing, and stuff with. So you can draw with a lot of different things. You can also try using different brushes. So this is a more traditional brush that I got at the Daiso store, and so you can use it, the more like expressive way. I don't know the ancient arts of that kind of stuff, but you can use different types of regular paint brushes too with it. You can also use toothbrushes to create gradation, kind of like spray paint. You don't want to use one that you're going to want to use again for your teeth, but feel free to use an X's or something like that. But you dip it into the ink. You don't want to, if you wait tables or do something retail where you have to use your hands, you probably want to put gloves on because it will stain your hands for a few days. But I don't have to anymore. So I'm just going to flick it towards the paper with my thumb, and you can see it creates like a airbrush sort of technique. So you can create gradation by doing it more in one place or doing it lighter in one place, and it's kind of fun and soft, and I don't know, I really like doing this, but I'll have a black thumb for a couple of days now because this is permanent. It will stain. Once it dries, it's stained, so be careful with your clothing and things like this. But you can also use stencils. So like if you have like a stencil, or I'm just going to put this candle here, you could dip the ink in it and then just kind of go around it, and it will work as a stencil. But it has the look of spray paint without having to use the harsh chemicals. But you see, it's like kind of works. So it's kind of fun. So you don't have to do any of these things, but you could. I just want you to see, like, this one little jar of ink is filled with surprises, or to me, fun things. You can see there's a couple of puddles of ink here. You can take a straw and blow the ink around. My lungs are not healthy right now, so I can't blow super hard. But these you can blow it, and it looks like little tree branches or veins. And I have one of my students from from TCC. She's now an elementary school teacher. She teaches, I think, kindergarten through 8th grade, and every year she has me. It's a private school. She has me come and judge like her students' art show, and for each grade. And so it's kind of cool because a lot of the assignments we did in college, she found simple ways for her students to do one of those things. And one of the things she does with the kindergartners is she gives them a long piece of watercolor paper, and then she puts a drop of ink and makes them try to blow it all the way down the edge of the paper. And so it ends up looking like a long tree branch, and then they paint little red flowers on it, and it looks like a Japanese cherry blossom, and they look so good. And she says some of them pass out because they forget to breathe because they get so excited. So it's pretty fun. So like even the simple thing, ink just has this sort of lively quality to it that's kind of nice. And then some other little things you can do to create like an effect the opposite of the wet on wet. You can use alcohol. This is rubbing alcohol. And you have to do this pretty quick. Like a lot of these things you have to do quick, like while it's wet. So you can't, be too slow with it. But if you put the ink down, and then drop the alcohol on it, do you see how it's creating kind of like this acid wash effect? And it like pushes the ink away. So it kind of looks like the opposite of that. I had a chemistry teacher, she came to my class a few semesters ago just to observe, and I was doing this the day she came, and she was like, this is called osmosis, or I don't know what she was saying. And this is called this, and every little technique I did, she had a scientific term for it, and I was like, get out of here, don't use that language. We call it magic. But she literally, she was like, oh, like she had a scientific name for like all the transfer of, I guess, the ink matter or whatever. I was like, don't use this word.
She's right about the
thing. But the alcohol, there's some.
I was worried it was gonna.
Oh no, there's some. I guess it's like about the alcohol that making it evaporate or something. I don't know. But anyway, so you can use alcohol. Another thing you can use is salt, and I have like a thing of salt there. But if you while the ink is wet, if you take some salt and put it on it, you have to do it while it's wet. And then just let it dry. It'll take a while to dry. But once it's completely dry, when you dust the salt off, it leaves like a grainy texture that kind of looks like sand. And you can see, so I labeled all these techniques over here, and you can see where I've done them in watercolor too. So you can see some of those effects. But you can kind of see around the salt crystals, it kind of pushes the ink away. And she had a scientific term for that too, but I don't remember what it was. And then I think this is the last technique I have. But I don't know if this is exciting to you guys, but I've done it about 200 times probably, and I still get excited playing with it.
My grandkids are going to get so excited because I'm taking it to the next level now.
Oh, yeah. And then this is like kids' bubble solution, and I saw this on YouTube, and I was like, get out of here. And so you can put the ink in the kids' bubble solution, but it makes the bubble solution permanent. So just beware if you have small pets that have light colored fur and the bubbles get on them. I had some different colored dogs for a couple of weeks. But when you blow the bubbles, you have to kind of learn to control it. And you will get black freckles if you're too close, just FYI. But it creates these like sea life looking amoeba.
Like amoebas.
Yeah. See, I learned something in science. But you can't always control. But they just create little cool like spheres. But you have to get the solution just right. When I saw this video, I went out and bought all kinds of color inks, and I got a bubble gun that like moved. And I at the time I lived in an apartment, and I covered my patio with I bought a roll of watercolor paper, and I just rolled it out. And I had two doors to my balcony, one from my bedroom and one from the living room. And I forgot the one was cracked, and I was out there with permanent inks, like just blowing all different colored bubbles, and my dogs ran out, and it was a mess. But I had some really cool paper for a while that I would just use with these different colored things on it. But hopefully this is kind of exciting to you. Again, you may not use any of these techniques, but I wanted you to see that with just a small little jar of ink, there's all these different possibilities. And if you do rubbings, you could do rubbings with crayons, and then if you put ink over it, it'll show through. So there is a way you can kind of combine these together, but I still want you to do at least 2 drawings. So you may do more than 2, so have fun, experiment. There's more examples for you to look at. Feel free to take pictures of some of this stuff. And if you just have like a black and white photo that you want to work with, you could just do a black and white value study with the ink and mix the values and just paint it. So don't feel like you have to go wild and crazy and combine too many techniques together. You could just kind of keep it simple and do 1 or 2. I just wanted you to see that those of you that like to work more with a ballpoint pen, you might have fun just dipping a stick in it and drawing with it. Those of you that like to do watercolor may find working like this way may be kind of fun. And you can use color. So I have some things here. These I got at Michael's. They were only like $10, but these are watercolor markers. And these will probably fade over time, but as long as you get a good photo, with social media nowadays, that's all you kind of need. But these have like a brush tip, and then they also have a like marker tip, but you can come back with a brush and water and blend them into each other. So they're like water soluble markers, and so you can use them together, so they're kind of fun. And then I know I mentioned colored pencils whenever we were doing color, and so they have water soluble colored pencils that you can also color with and then use water and blend them to look like watercolor if you don't want to get super messy. These are kind of fun, and they blend, and some of them, like I've even drawn with them where I wanted like a bolder line. I don't know if you're supposed to do this, but I'll dip them in the water, and then they kind of make marks like a marker would. So I don't know if it's good for the wood and the pencil though. But anyway, and then you can also find, this is where I get a little crazy, but you can find like complete sets of colored inks, and these ones, I haven't figured out how to, I guess you have to shake it for a long time, but these ones are actually iridescent. I don't know why. What medicine I'd taken that day, but I felt like I needed these. And but you can see it's like a whole tray of these, and they sell these at Michael's and Hobby Lobby. And if you get like one of those 50% off coupons, and they're not all iridescent. You can get just like regular colors or transparent colors, and they're like watercolor, but they're permanent inks, and it's pigmented. So unlike, it'll be like the calligraphy inks in that video, they won't fade, but they are kind of expensive. So I think this set was like around $25 or $30 for all these. But that's, to me, that's a lot of ink. And I haven't used them just because I just like looking at it right now. But I'm trying to figure out what I want to use them for. But anyway, so there's lots of things out there. Feel free to use mixed media. When the ink dries, it's still got the texture of the paper. So you can use your pastels on top of it. You can use your charcoal with it. So that one guy, remember those birds I showed y'all? He used like charcoal and pastel on top of the ink. So have fun, like experiment, but don't just sit and be stuck with your ideas. Like, okay, try to just do several things. Like start several ones at home. I'll work on like 4 or 5 paintings at the same time. So instead of just thinking like, what do I do? Just commit to something. And if you finish, you can always do something else if you don't like it, okay? And if you have any like reference photos or things you want me to print, you can email them to me and I'll print them for you to look at if you want. Okay? So, and if you want to see, I know this isn't completely, let me try to blot off the excess. But if you wanted to see how these things, you can see the finished effects on the board, but like the rubber cement, it's kind of a, since it's not dry, it may smudge a little bit, but you can see, you can kind of rub it off. You don't have to, but you can. But it's not super easy to do it, but like this stuff, like it's literally like peeling a rubber band off your paper, and it's very, and see, like you can just rub those little dots off and it's like perfect. Yeah, so anyway, so have fun. If you have those questions like, can I do this, you don't even have to ask me, okay? If there's ink on one and there's rubbings on one, that's all that there has to be, okay?
You mentioned,
So,
you
oh, it's
mentioned